Before I dive in, let me warn you, this isn't some fairy tale where everything magically works out. It's messy, painful, and entirely my fault. Hello, my name is Claire. I'm 30 years old, and my husband, Ethan, is 35. We've been together for 3 years, and I thought we had built something solid. But last Friday night changed everything, and not for the better. Ethan is one of the most thoughtful, hardworking men I've ever known. He runs a small but successful landscaping business, the kind of job that requires long hours and dedication. He's not flashy or extravagant, but he's the guy who brings you coffee just the way you like it without being asked and notices when you've had a tough day. Despite all that, I've managed to unravel everything we built together. It started innocently enough, a girls' night out after a particularly stressful week at work. The night was full of laughter, drinks, and a bit too much wine. By the time I got home, I was buzzing, both from the alcohol and a strange sense of frustration I couldn't quite place. Ethan was waiting up for me. He'd stayed awake to make sure I got home safely, a habit of his that I usually found endearing. But that night, instead of thanking him, I blurted out the cruelest thing I've ever said. I'm not even attracted to you anymore. I didn't even realize I had said it. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, and there he was, sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. His voice was quiet, but his words cut through the fog in my mind like a knife. Is that what you really think of me? In that moment, everything shattered. We met 4 years ago at a small cafe in Savannah, Georgia, where he worked as a manager. I remember the first time I saw him, wearing a simple button-up shirt and a tired but genuine smile. He wasn't the type I usually went for. My friends always teased me about chasing after bad boys who were all style and no substance. Ethan was different, steady, reliable, and kind. He didn't sweep me off my feet, but he made me feel safe in a way no one else ever had. We started dating after a few casual conversations at the cafe. It wasn't love at first sight, but something grew between us, something real. After a year and a half, he proposed in our favorite park, not with grand gestures, but with heartfelt simplicity. "You're my best friend," he said. "I can't imagine life without you. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. The first year of our marriage was everything I'd hoped for. Ethan's dependability and warmth made me feel cherished in ways I'd never known. But somewhere along the way, the cracks began to form. They weren't obvious at first, just little things I started to notice. The way he didn't seem interested in exercising, or how he'd wear the same worn-out jeans that didn't fit quite right. I tried to brush it off, but the nagging voice in my head grew louder. Did I settle? It didn't help that my friends often made comments like, "Claire, you could have ended up with anyone." "Why, Ethan?" Their words planted seeds of doubt that took root and began to grow. I'd scroll through social media, comparing our quiet, simple life to the curated perfection of others, couples traveling the world, hitting the gym together, looking flawless in every photo. I started picking at Ethan, making snide remarks about his clothes or his eating habits, all under the guise of playful teasing. But they weren't playful. They were mean, and I knew it. Ethan noticed, of course. "Is everything okay?" he'd ask. I'd shrug it off, saying I was tired or stressed from work. The truth was, I didn't know how to explain the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But I was also resenting him for reasons I couldn't even articulate. And then Friday night happened. That one drunken sentence, thrown like a grenade, obliterated the fragile balance we'd been trying to maintain. Now here we are, picking up the pieces, if there are any pieces left to pick up. This is where it all begins to unravel. The silence between us over the weekend was unbearable. Ethan barely spoke, his usual warmth replaced by a hollow detachment that sent chills down my spine. On Sunday evening, I found him in the garage, organizing his tools. He'd always said it was therapeutic for him, a way to clear his mind. But this time, it felt different, like he was putting up walls I couldn't break through. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. He paused, his back still to me, before turning around slowly. "What is there to talk about, Claire?" he said. "You've made it pretty clear how you feel." "I didn't mean it," I said quickly. "I was drunk and I don't know why I said it." It's not true. Ethan's eyes, usually so kind, were filled with a mix of pain and disbelief. Drunk words are sober thoughts, he said quietly. Isn't that what people say? I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because deep down, I couldn't deny that there was some truth to what he said. I'd been harboring doubts, letting them fester until they exploded in the worst possible way. I love you, Ethan, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I love you too, Claire. But love isn't enough when you don't respect me. Those words hit me like a freight train. Respect. Had I really lost respect for him? Or had I let my insecurities and the opinions of others cloud my judgment? Ethan turned back to his tools, effectively ending the conversation. I stood there for a moment, feeling helpless, before retreating to the house. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was any way to fix what I'd broken. The next morning, Ethan left for work without saying goodbye. The emptiness in our home was suffocating, a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. I knew I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find a way to make things right, but first, I had to figure out what had gone so horribly wrong. The following week was a blur of awkward silences and unanswered texts. Ethan started working late, something he rarely did before, and when he was home, he retreated into the garage or buried himself in a book. The distance between us grew unbearable. One evening, I decided to reach out to Jenna, my closest friend. She had always been the voice of reason, even when I didn't want to hear it. Jenna, I think I've really messed things up with Ethan, I confessed over the phone. My voice wavered, betraying the tears I'd been holding back all day. What happened? She asked, concern lacing her tone. I said something horrible, something I didn't even mean. And now, it feels like I've destroyed everything. Jenna sighed on the other end. Claire, you've always been hard on yourself. Maybe he just needs time. You two have been through so much together. You can't let one mistake define your relationship. I wish it were that simple, I muttered. He said I don't respect him, and honestly, I don't even know if he's wrong. Her pause was heavy, filled with unspoken truths. Have you considered why you're feeling this way? I mean, Ethan's always been there for you. What's changed? That question lingered in my mind long after our call ended. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was right. I needed to look inward before I could even think about repairing things with Ethan. As the days passed, I started reflecting on the root of my unhappiness. Was it really Ethan, or was it something within me? The doubt, the comparisons, the insecurity, they were all seeds I had planted and watered myself. Ethan wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And if I wanted any chance of saving our marriage, I needed to take responsibility for my part in its unraveling. The realization hit me one quiet afternoon as I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me. The house felt too quiet without Ethan's usual hum of activity, a stark contrast to the vibrant life we once shared. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The problem wasn't just the rift between us, it was me. Determined to take some action, I decided to see a therapist. I needed to untangle the mess in my head before I could even hope to approach Ethan with any sort of solution. It felt strange admitting to a stranger how deeply I'd hurt the person I claimed to love most, but the therapist's warm, non-judgmental demeanor made it easier. Why do you think you've been feeling this way? She asked gently during our first session. I hesitated, picking at the edge of a tissue. I don't know, I said, though I knew it wasn't entirely true. I guess I've been comparing our life to others. I see these perfect couples on social media, always traveling, always looking so happy. And then I look at us and wonder if I made a mistake. She nodded thoughtfully. Comparison can be incredibly toxic. Social media rarely shows the whole story. What made you fall in love with Ethan in the first place? That question pulled me up short. Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. His quiet determination, the way he listened without judgment, the little surprises he'd planned just to see me smile. Those were the things that mattered, not the curated snapshots of other people's lives. He makes me feel safe, I admitted finally. Loved. Like I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. And yet, you've been pushing him away, she observed. Why do you think that is? Tears welled up in my eyes as the truth I'd been avoiding bubbled to the surface. Because I'm scared, I whispered. Scared that I'm not enough for him, or that he'll realize he deserves better. The therapist leaned forward, her gaze steady. It sounds like the person you don't trust in this relationship is yourself. That thought stayed with me long after the session ended. For the first time, I began to understand that the doubts I'd projected onto Ethan were really a reflection of my own insecurities. If I wanted to save our marriage, I needed to address those fears head-on. A few weeks passed, and while Ethan and I still moved around each other like strangers, I started making small changes. I stopped the snide remarks and tried to focus on the things I appreciated about him instead. When he came home late from work one evening, I greeted him with his favorite meal instead of an accusatory glare. "What's this?" he asked, clearly surprised as he set his keys on the counter. "Just dinner," I said, trying to sound casual. "You've been working so hard lately. I thought you could use a break." He studied me for a moment, as if searching for the hidden agenda behind my words. But then he nodded and sat down, and for the first time in weeks, we shared a meal that wasn't overshadowed by tension. That small victory gave me hope. I knew it would take more than a few dinners and kind words to rebuild what I'd broken, but it was a start. I started opening up to him in small ways, sharing snippets of my therapy journey and the realizations I'd come to about myself. At first, Ethan listened quietly, offering little in return. But one night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he finally broke his silence. "Do you know how hard it's been to feel like I'm not enough for you?" he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Like no matter what I do, it's never good enough?" My chest tightened with guilt, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I've been so caught up in my own fears that I've been blind to how amazing you are. You've always been enough. I'm the one who's been falling short." He looked at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I want to believe that, Claire. But it's going to take time." "I understand," I said, reaching for his hand. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, Ethan. I don't want to lose you." He didn't say anything, but he didn't pull away either. And in that quiet moment, I felt the faintest flicker of hope, a fragile spark that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The next few months were a slow, uphill climb. Therapy became a cornerstone of my journey, not just for myself, but eventually for us as a couple. Ethan agreed to join me for sessions, albeit reluctantly at first. Our therapist encouraged us to communicate openly, to face our fears and insecurities instead of avoiding them. Through those sessions, I learned about the weight Ethan had been carrying silently, his fear of losing me, his doubts about whether he could ever truly make me happy. In turn, he began to understand the insecurities that had driven my cruel words and actions. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, we were really talking. We started spending more intentional time together, slowly dismantling the walls we'd built between us. Simple gestures became the foundation of our healing, surprise notes tucked into lunch bags, impromptu weekend drives to places we used to love, and quiet evenings spent reminiscing about the good times. One evening, Ethan surprised me by recreating our first date. He led me to a small cafe, not unlike the one where we'd met. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and soft jazz playing in the background instantly took me back to those early days when everything felt new and exciting. As we sat down, Ethan reached across the table and held my hand. "I've missed this," he said softly. "The way we used to laugh, the way we didn't need anything fancy to be happy." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. "Me too. I've missed us." That night, as we walked home under a sky full of stars, I felt something shift. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months felt lighter, and for the first time, I believed we could rebuild what we'd lost. Over the next few weeks, we worked hard to make our changes stick. There were setbacks, moments of doubt and frustration, but each time we faltered, we reminded ourselves of why we were fighting. The love we had shared in the beginning wasn't gone, it had just been buried under layers of hurt and misunderstanding. Together, we unearthed it, piece by piece. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat in the backyard planting a garden, Ethan looked over at me and smiled. "You know, I think we've got something good here," he said. I wiped a smudge of dirt from my cheek and grinned. "We do. And I'm not letting it go again." He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Neither am I." In that moment, surrounded by the simple beauty of the life we were rebuilding together, I knew we had found our way back to each other. We weren't just okay, we were stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever came next together.